The new president of the Association of National Olympic Committees of Africa, ANOCA, has set the 2019 African Games in Morocco as his main priority. Algerian Mustapha Berraf says he wants to make sure the Games are free of the hitches that have affected past editions. Berraf was elected the new president of the association at a General Assembly in Tokyo late last month. It took 2 rounds of voting for the Algerian N-O-C chief to win the vote. He gathered 34 votes in the second round, beating the African athletics chief Kalkaba Hamad Malboum of Cameroon and Burundi's Lydia Nsekera to the top job. CGTN's Edmond Nyabola spoke to Berraf prior to the vote. He began by stating his plan for improving African participation by events in the Olympic Games.
We have already started helping by kicking off a process that will help zones host events. From there, it will grow and we will help countries host events. Algeria has hosted many events that have concluded with great performances from athletes. The hosting conditions were good. Nigeria and South Africa have also done so, countries with good means. For sure, there are some athletes that are not funded well. We at ANOCA have released some funds, $2.5 million, in countries to support athletes in countries that don't have means. I think it is clear now that these finances should not go to one sport but must be distributed to many disciplines. It must especially be distributed to people that have ambition to succeed.
Du fonctionnement de l'ACNOA.
We recently got big news that the 2022 Youth Olympic Games will be held in Dakar, Senegal, the first Olympic event to be held in the continent. But do you think the continent has capacity to host a senior summer Olympic event sometime in the future? And if elected, will you be able to champion for that?
Il faut saluer la décision du président et des membres du CIO.
On this issue of 2022 Youth Olympic Games, we have to thank the president of the IOC and its members, and we must congratulate Senegal. Africa organized a great World Cup thanks to South Africa. We mustn't forget that. There is an interest in Africa to host the Olympic Games. Nevertheless, other factors are taken into account for the organization of Olympic Games. There's a question of hosting conditions, because, you know, there are millions of visitors. You need to have the right infrastructure. Some emerging African countries are making a lot of effort in development. Perhaps in a few years, we will have the joy of seeing the Olympics organized in Africa. What we must say is that we are convinced that Africa must now have equal standing with other continents. In Africa, there are more countries than other continents. The youth population is also very significant.
Les conditions d'accueil.
How will you help the continent and its refugee athletes to be able to train and prepare more for Olympic events and participate and even win medals in Olympic events?
Nous avons effectivement eu une participation symbolique.
We had a symbolic participation of refugees in 2016. Nevertheless, today we have a plan. We placed a former African champion to head this issue, Tekla Lorupe, who is a Kenyan champion in charge of putting in place a program that will help us support refugees. The initial part of our plan was to create the Olymp African Centers. We can't fix every problem. We do not have infinite resources, but with our means, we will try to use our human and financial resources so that these young athletes will find the African Olympic movement at their disposal.
Centre Olympe Africain, comme vous le savez.
Right now, for more on this topic, we can now speak to Ugandan sports journalist Alan Darren Keyune on phone for us from Entebbe. Darren, the new ANOCA president says he wants to rid the 2019 African Games of organizational hitches. What are some of the challenges that he is referring to in this case?
Special thanks for having me, Mahia. I think the challenges that ANOCA does have, and perhaps what Mustapha Berraf and his administration will be finding ahead, should be the logistical to see that the African Games do get and scale the height. 54 years now as we speak for the next edition after they were inaugurated back in 1965 to a level where perhaps they do touch the class that is of the Olympic Games. However, there have already been clashes to do with the different governments and as well as running disciplines, and that as well cuts into the organization of the event. Plus also the host countries delivering the perfect product that I don't think has yet been witnessed by the organizers, something that I think Berraf would be loving to cherish.
Now, you've listened to his plans there. He has been obviously speaking cautiously about the possibility of the continent hosting the Summer Olympic Games. Do you think that Africa has the capacity with reference to the possible hosting?
I think Africa has the capacity, but I think that falls to the interest and desire sense. However, when it gets to the real work being done to host an Olympic event, it takes more than 4 years. It takes more than a cycle to prepare for the Olympic Games. Obviously, the African countries that you do feel have put enough on the table to push for the candidacy to be host of the Olympic Games. But when you look at the next editions, the next one in Tokyo, the next one in Paris in 2024, then Tokyo in 2020, you do not see any African country even ready to challenge for the 2028 bid or even the 2032 bid, if anything, to go by the 4-year cycle. But I do think countries like South Africa that have hosted the 2010 FIFA World Cup, Morocco as well, has showed interest to host the FIFA World Cup. Tournaments of that caliber do push a country into pushing to host the Olympic Games. But I still think that if the World Cup asks for a hall, then the Olympic Games ask for times 5 what the FIFA World Cup does require for one to host that particular tournament. So I do not think African countries are yet ready, even if I do feel Morocco leads the way in infrastructure. Leslie.
And finally, Darren, Berraf takes over an organization that is charged with the responsibility of implementing Olympic programs on the continent. Towards that end, how would you rate ANOCA's performance?
Well, it's been topsy-turvy across the continent. You will obviously find some federations are working, some Olympic committees are working, others are being challenged by the bodies that directly run sports on behalf of the government. For example, here in Uganda, where we've found the National Council of Sports clashing with the Uganda Olympic Committee over where will the money go. Does it go to the prime disciplines? There have also been challenges in neighboring Kenya. We've had Kipchoge Keino in recent times where he had a really, really big outburst. And of course, that as well came down to corruption. So issues to do with money, whether the government does run the disciplines or the Olympic Committee, have as well painted a picture that has not been desired by ANOCA. But you still, with their work to push Olympic programs down the road, with what helps for ANOCA at the moment is the buffer of the age category that the continent has. Most of the people are in the age categories that do accept sport to be played, and that is the youth category, where you feel ANOCA should be tapping in from that. And perhaps even you feel the inclusion of the refugees, because this is a continent that has literally the highest number of refugees, if you do check the statistics, and also the inclusion of new disciplines, because as the world evolves, there are disciplines that are being involved, but then you find some Olympic committees are really hell-bent on those disciplines that they do feel can bring medals in a 4-year cycle at the Olympics, which you feel may affect other disciplines. You find perhaps Uganda concentrates more on athletics rather than archery, and maybe that would be the story across the other different disciplines across the continent. So you find that also remains a challenge for ANOCA when they do try to implement some of the Olympic programs down.
All right, Darren, thank you very much for speaking to us on Match Point. That was Darren Keyune, sports analyst and journalist, speaking to us live there from Entebbe.